Did you know the average EV costs a whopping 17% more than a regular new car? That's right, electric vehicles come with a hefty price tag. But that's just the beginning. There are still a lot more hidden costs behind EVs. Let's uncover each one of them. Alright, let's talk about money. EVs are still way pricier than your average gas-powered car. We are talking about a big difference here. You're looking at an average of $55,000 for an electric vehicle, compared to around $47,000 for a regular new car. That's a huge gap, right? Now, you might be thinking, okay, maybe I'll just get a used EV then. Well, not so fast. Used EVs are losing value like crazy. It's like they're going out of style or something. A recent study showed that used EVs lost almost a third of their value in just 1 year. Can you believe that? Meanwhile, regular car users only lost a tiny bit. So what's going on here? Why are EVs so expensive? Part of it is the technology batteries that are still really costly to make. And they're a big part of what makes an EV run. Plus, there's less competition in the EV market compared to gas cars, so manufacturers can kinda charge what they want. But the thing is, even with all those high prices, people are still buying EVs. Why? Well, some folks really care about the environment and want to reduce their carbon footprint. Others might just like the idea of not having to fill up at the gas station, so there's definitely a demand for these cars, even with the hefty price tag. But let's be real, for most of us that price difference is a big deal. It's a lot of money to shell out for a car, no matter how cool it is. So while EVs are getting more popular, they're still not the most affordable option for everyone. Also, a recent study showed used EVs losing nearly 32% of their value in just a year, compared to a measly 3.6% for gas cars. Okay, so let's assume that you've decided to ditch gas and go electric. Great for the environment, right? Well, let's talk about the cost of charging your EV. It's not always as cheap as you might think. Sure, charging at home can be cheaper than filling up at the gas station. But let's be real, how many of us actually charge our cars at home overnight and only drive short distances during the day? Probably not many. Most of us need to use public charging stations at some point, especially for long road trips. And here's the thing about those public chargers, they're not cheap, especially the fast chargers that can get your battery topped up quickly. You could be paying double or even triple the cost of charging at home. It's like paying a premium for convenience, but it adds up fast. A recent study found that it can cost around $18 to charge an EV for 100 miles on the highway. Compare that to a gas car, which might only cost you about $10 for the same distance. That's a difference of 80%. So while you might save money on gas, you're spending more on electricity. And it's not just the cost of charging that you need to consider. There's also the time factor. Fast charging is great in a pinch, but it's not the norm. Most public chargers are slower, so you might have to wait around for a while to get a full charge. This can be a real pain if you're on a road trip and need to keep moving. So while EVs are definitely getting better, the cost of charging is still something to think about. It's not as simple as just swapping one expense for another. Okay, so we've talked about the upfront cost of buying an EV and the ongoing cost of charging it. But there's something else you might not have considered, the hidden cost to the rest of us. See, when everyone starts plugging in their EVs to charge, it puts a strain on the electric grid. It's like a bunch of people suddenly turning on their air conditioners on a hot summer day. The power grid needs to be able to handle this extra demand, and that costs money. So who pays for those upgrades to the grid? Ultimately, it's the consumers, which means your electricity bill could go up. And it's not just about the cost of upgrading the grid. There's also the issue of wear and tear. All that extra electricity being used can put stress on power plants and other infrastructure. Now let's talk about roads. You know those gas taxes we pay. That money goes towards building and maintaining roads. But EVs don't pay those taxes. The thing is that electric cars are usually heavier than gas cars, which means they cause more damage to roads. So who's going to pay for the extra road repairs? Well, it's likely to come out of our taxes again. It's like we're subsidizing EV owners, while also paying higher electricity bills. Doesn't seem fair, does it? It's important to remember that these are just some of the hidden costs associated with EVs. There might be other things we haven't even thought of yet. So while the EVs are great for reducing pollution, we need to be aware of the overall impact on society and the economy. Alright, let's clear up some misconceptions about EV maintenance. While it's true that EVs don't need oil changes, that doesn't mean they're completely maintenance-free. There are still things that need to be looked after. First, let's talk about the battery. It's the heart of an electric car, but it doesn't last forever. Over time, the battery's capacity will decline. This means you won't be able to drive as far on a single charge as you used to. And when the battery finally gives out, replacing it can be a real shock to your wallet. We're talking thousands of dollars here, not hundreds. Another thing to consider is repairs. EVs are packed with complex technology, and fixing them isn't as simple as working on a gas car. There are fewer mechanics who specialize in EVs, so finding someone to fix your car can be a challenge. And when you do find someone, the cost of repairs is often higher because of the specialized parts and labor. And let's not forget about tires. EVs are generally heavier than gas cars, which puts more stress on the tires. This means you'll likely need to replace your tires more often than if you were driving a gas car. That's another expense to factor in. So, while EVs might save you money on gas, there are other costs to consider. It's important to weigh the pros and cons before making the switch. You might think that owning an EV would save you money on insurance, right? Well, think again. It's actually the opposite. Insurance companies look at a lot of factors when deciding how much to charge you for car insurance. Things like the car's value, the cost of repairs, and your driving record all play a role. And when it comes to EVs, these factors can add up to a pretty hefty insurance bill. First, EVs are generally more expensive to buy than gas cars. This means they're also more expensive to replace if they're stolen or totaled in an accident. So your insurance company has to charge you more to cover the cost of replacing your car. Second, as we talked about earlier, repairing an EV can be really expensive. There are fewer repair shops that specialize in electric cars, and the parts are often more costly. This means insurance companies have to factor in higher repair costs when setting your premium. And let's not forget about those luxury EVs like Teslas. These cars are not only expensive to buy, but they're also often targeted by thieves. This higher risk of theft means insurance companies have to charge more to cover the cost of replacing a stolen Tesla. The National Association of Insurance Commissioners found that insuring an EV is, on average, 20% more expensive than a gas car. And for luxury EVs like Teslas, the cost can skyrocket. So while you might be saving money at the pump with an EV, you could end up spending more on insurance. It's just another thing to consider when weighing the pros and cons of electric car ownership. So, are EVs all hype? EVs have their advantages, but let's be honest, they're not a magic bullet. Before you jump on the electric wizard, consider the hidden costs. The initial investment might be a hurdle, and long-term costs like battery replacement and depreciation are a concern. Charging costs can vary widely depending on your needs, and the infrastructure for public charging is still developing. EVs are a promising technology, but they're not a one-size-fits-all solution. Do your research before making the switch. Consider your driving habits, access to charging infrastructure, and budget. An EV might be a great choice for some, but for others, a gas-powered car might still be the better option. Thanks for joining us today. Let us know what you think about the hidden costs of EVs. Are you still considering going electric, or are you sticking with gas for now? Do comment and hit that like button if you found this video helpful, and subscribe for more car talk.